Hey, good afternoon everybody. This is Harley Milne with the 50X Challenge. This afternoon what I'm going to do is show you how I planned my route for the Sonoma to Oshkosh, and in general what a lot more people have been asking me for is more of the behind the scenes types of information about how I go ahead and do my planning, my training, as well as many other aspects as to how I get my trips underway. So with that, I'm going to go ahead here and switch to my desktop screen, and I use Google Maps predominantly for my planning. And as you'll see here, I was able to go ahead and create my start point, which is Noss Field here in Sonoma, and then of course ending all the way out in Pioneer Field. And so as you see here, you basically get what I like to refer to as a straight line trip. And if you could follow that line exactly, then you'll see that the trip is really more about 1,800 miles. However, as you know, for a number of different reasons, which might include safety, maybe the best path about to go over a particular area like a mountain, or if you're unsupported like I am on this trip, being able to land near a road where somebody can help you out is particularly important. So as you'll see here, what I started to do, and particularly with this trip because I'm flying airport to airport and responsible for all of my own refueling, I wanted to obviously make sure that I'm selecting different airports that match in with that. And so you'll see here as I pull this up here, my initial here was to go ahead and find as many airports along the way. And typically what I'm doing is with using a 4-gallon tank, or about 18 gallons of fuel, 18 liters of fuel, I can typically fly anything from 80 to 120 miles depending what the weather is doing. And of course, if I've got a nice tailwind, then I've been able to do upwards of 150 to 180 miles on average with most of those flights. So I'm using some of that information, and so essentially what I've done with this trip is to try and find an airport that's within 60 to 90 miles in each case, so that if I decide to skip a particular airport and realize that maybe I can go another 30 or 60 miles, that those airports are fairly well spaced out. And so you'll see here that basically my trip here covers, I don't know, it's about 22, maybe 30 different airports here along the way. In fact, I think it's 32 airports that I picked out. And then the next thing that I go ahead and do is I look for all my alternate airports. And so as you see, as I bring these all up, there's a lot more airports. And then of course as I zoom in even, you can see that a lot more detail comes in. So for example, on my very first flight here, which is going to run pretty much from Sonoma all the way to Placerville, I have all these additional airports that are along the way that I could go to if I had to. And of course I'm familiar with the Sonoma area, so there are in fact a lot more airports that I can go to. For my next segment, which is pretty much Placerville out to believe this next airport here that I want to go to is Minden. And I'm making that a fairly short flight. It's only about 60 miles as the crow flies, but I have to climb all the way from about 3,000 MSL all the way up to at least 10,000 MSL to get over the mountain, and preferably closer to about 12,000 so that I don't land up with any of the leeward wind through the mountain actually buffering me around. So with that, that's pretty much a short flight, but you'll see here I do have some alternates that I could go to if for some reason or other I decide that it's unsafe to land at Minden, or maybe in reality if I get over there and I haven't used as much fuel as I thought I would use, then of course I could continue my journey on and try and get some more fuel. So in this case, yep, the first day, the first 2 flights kind of get me over the Tahoe Mountains. But then I plan to keep going, and as you see here along the way, and you can actually see this like slightly orange line coming along here on the screen, where I continue onwards. And my first planned stop for the night is actually Winnemucca, which is nearly 300 miles away from where I get started. So that's a fairly simplistic way of what I go about doing in terms of looking at airports and so forth that I can go to and refuel. But of course, as many of you realize, the airspace is also particularly important. And so when I'm planning these routes, one of the things I also spend a lot of time looking at is of course sky vector here, and I want to be able to go ahead and look in at all the airspace that I'm going to be flying through. And as you'll see here in Salt Lake City, I believe that's around about here, things get quite a bit more interesting because there is actually some Charlie airspace here for some of the bigger aircraft, and actually here up at Ogden and the Military Air Force Base here, those are both Class D airports. And as you see, even there it looks like there's a TFR that's going to come into play here for aerial demonstrations on 6/23. So these are all factors that I want to look at. And even here along my path is a railway line here, and then I-80, I think if I remember correctly, comes in right down the bottom here and makes its way all the way down into Salt Lake City. So I'm going to be flying between these 2 restricted areas, and it's very important that I don't breach those particular areas. And as you see here, it is, I-80 comes in along here and goes along. And actually I have a planned stop here at Toole as one of my stops after leaving Wendover. So there's not a lot of airports and options to fly from there to there. It's not a very long flight, I think probably about 100 miles. But then from there to get through all this airspace and get through Salt Lake City in particular, I've got to make sure that I'm below the Charlie airspace, which if I go just north along this area here, 6,000 feet is as high as I can go. Over here it's about 7,500, and I can cross these 2 Class D airports at around about 2,500 if I want to, but obviously those areas might be quite busy. So in this particular case, my goal, you'll see here there's this highway that comes all the way up. This is Highway 84, and then it joins up with I-80 and then continues up to Evanston here. And so one of the routes that I'm potentially looking at is to go from here up to this island here and then be able to cross over, and I have to stay below 10,500 until I get to where this area is here where 84 comes in. And once I get there, then I can try and climb to over 10,000. And if you look very carefully, the top of the mountain here is 11.8, and 9,259 feet just over here is the top of this peak. So definitely, through this area, and I can follow the road for some safety, but if I do land up with some particularly good, strong tailwinds, and the engine is functioning as I would anticipate, then I can go ahead and try and shorten these lengths, or if I've got some real guts, try and make in a length all the way to Evanston there. So essentially that's how I look at, first of all, the direction that I want to go to, see what airports might be available, then I look at the airspace, and then I also spend a fair amount of time actually going down and looking at what roads are going to be available to me, because I don't really want to get stuck out a long way from where I can get some help. Normally, even if we're trying to walk around with 60 pounds and a glider with us, that can wear us out pretty quickly. And so of course you can imagine if you landed out in an area where there's absolutely no roads, trying to get some help is quite difficult. So you'll notice with this path, in many cases I make sure that I'm a fairly close distance to where some roads are, and typically I'm using my altitude to try and make sure that I could glide back to a major road, or if I don't quite make the road, that I'm going to do the best that I can to minimize how far away I am from some help. Some other things that I take a look at is phases of the moon. So in a perfect world, particularly if you're going to start your flights pretty early in the morning, and in my case here, I'm looking to get just a little bit more light so I can use all those 30 minutes before your launch and so forth. But if I was able to fly at night, for example, that would be another reason to understand what the moon phases are. Now for this next trip, because I need to actually arrive at Oshkosh on July 25th, or at least within a day after that, I don't really have a lot of opportunity to try and let the weather decide or let the moon decide when I should try and take off, like we did with the Coast to Coast. Specifically there, what we did was we worked with Dave Wirt, and he was our meteorologist, and he was able to advise us within a couple of days whether we should launch on the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, or the Monday. And as a result of that, and literally monitoring it hour by hour, we decided what day to specifically go on. Whereas with this one, you know, my expectation is I'm going to take 7 to 10 days to do that. And so I'm going to create that little buffer where, you know, if I make it in 7 days, fantastic, but more than likely it's going to take me closer to 10 days and make sure that I can go from there. So right now my planned departure date is somewhere between the 16th and the 18th, and as I get to know more about the weather, and you know, if we have a fire season, it could be quite smoky, all of those things might also affect some of the decisions that I go ahead and make. The other cool thing with this trip is you will see here that basically we have about up to 15 hours of daylight. If I leave here around about the 16th, I'm going to have about 15 hours, and then it gradually diminishes through the rest of the week, and I'll get about just shy of about 10 minutes shy of 15 hours by the time I get to Oshkosh. So you know, we would have got through the longest portion of the day, and so the reality is I know that I need to be planning to fly at least 3 flights of at least 3 hours per day to cover those 300 miles per day that I have set as my objective. But of course there could be some days where I get no flying, or maybe I only make 200, or on a really good day maybe I make 350, or you know, as much as 400 miles. So with the Coast to Coast, you know, to stay within FAA rules, I was only had about 8 hours of daylight per day, and only managed to fly about 7 to 7.5 hours per day. So I have a lot more flight time available to me with the daylight, but of course this is the middle of the summer, it's July, it's the northern routes, so I've got lots of heat to, you know, fly over 2 sets of mountains which are at over 10,000 feet. That's going to be pretty difficult. Also in the afternoons I'm likely to have some very, very strong thermic winds and probably won't be able to fly. So unlike with the Coast to Coast where I was able to fly pretty much from sun up till sundown, with this trip it's going to be more like how we might fly traditionally, which is that we fly the first few hours of the morning and the last few hours of the afternoon. And so obviously what I will want to do is maximize that first bit of light in the morning, fly as long as I can, try and get at least 2 full flights of 3 hours in the first part of the morning. So if I take off at 5, I'll be landing by 11 o'clock. Even that's going to be a challenge because it could start to get quite warm as early as 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and so that could impact that flight. So worst case scenario, I could be in a situation where I I might get 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening, or even a little less than that, and only make 200 miles per day. So it's an important factor of what I look at. Because I'm carrying all of my own equipment, I am having to spend a fair amount of time also looking at how much weight I'm going to be carrying. So just in fuel alone at 4 gallons, it's about 24 pounds. And then I have about another 6 or 8 pounds in oil that I'm going to be taking because obviously I'm self-sufficient in this particular. So that's slightly different from the coast to coast, where I just arrived and everybody helped me refuel and I didn't have to exert a lot of energy. In this case, I'm going to be carrying all of that equipment and to the fuel station, go and refuel, and then back to an area where I can take off. So my calculation so far is I'm going to have about 100 pounds of equipment. I've kind of set that as my cutoff for me personally. I'm 53 years old. Carrying 100 pounds is not exactly an easy gig for me, as it is for I guess a lot of people my age. So with that, one of the things I also double checked was what the specification is here on my glider, and I'm flying the Da Vinci Disco and Tiger in color from Da Vinci, and that was provided by Cloud-Based PPG through London IV. But the thing I wanted to double check here, and this is kind of interesting, you'll see that the weight range on this glider for the 18 that I'm flying is about 65 kilos to 140 kilos, and if I had gone with a 20, that would give me about 75 to 150 kilos. So on the 18, it's about 308 pounds is the maximum, and I'm estimating to come in at about 275 to 280 odd pounds on that. So I really am at the loaded level, and so that's going to help me if there's turbulence or any particular bad weather. And one of the reasons I'm going with the 18 instead of the 20 is because while I am going to be taking off at some high altitudes, on average about 4,000 feet to 4,400 feet, there are some areas where I'm going to be launching at over 7,000. And what I'm expecting is that I'm probably going to have more days with higher winds. And so having an 18-foot glider or an 18-meter glider is going to make it just a little bit easier for me to control in those high wind situations. As most of you know, I flew the 22 Hadron from Dudek, the Hadron 3, and I flew the first 1,000 miles with that on the 22, and it was absolutely fantastic. But what we did find in very, very high winds, it was a lot of glider to handle, and in reality, had I been on the 20, I would have been in much better shape. As it turned out, I chopped some lines on a launch, and I ended up having to switch to the Snake 1.2, and that was an 18 meter, and actually did the remaining 1,000 miles on that particular glider. So I know I can do it. The big difference, of course, was that I wasn't carrying as much weight. I think I averaged closer to about, 85 pounds. And that 5 or 10 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but in this particular case, with all the extra equipment that I'm going to be taking, that 18 is going to be fully loaded, and it's a lot of weight to get off the ground. So those are the basics of what I look at. I can use Flight Planner. One of the things I like about Flight Planner is I can turn on things like the sectional, and I can go back and forth between the sectional and the satellite quite easily. And then the other thing too is I can go ahead and look at things like all of the airspace, in particular airmets and sigmets, which are used by general aviation pilots mostly. But this can also tell me what the weather is doing over a much wider area. And of course, I'm doing this predominantly as the planning and familiarizing myself as to what things look like now, about a month before. And while the weather will change a little, this gives me some information to try and work with to begin and work with. So with that, I'll switch to the website here. If you haven't been to 50xchallenge.info, definitely go there, and that gives you an opportunity to read information about the plans that I have. It basically tells you the background, and then the two most interesting pages for most people are going to be the trip details page. That covers the actual schedule and where I'm hoping to get to on each day. You'll see that the main specific stops, which I'm referring to at night, are going to be the areas where I stop and need to figure out where I'm going to sleep on some of those nights. Some of those airports have facilities like car rental or even courtesy cars, but in many cases I'm going to have to figure out either how to get to a hotel for the night or rough it for the night if I have to. And there are a couple of nights where that's going to happen, but you'll see here the first planned night is out in Winnemucca, the second night is out in Salt Lake City, so hoping to catch up with Chris Santa Croce that day. And then from there on to Laramie. That's going to be the first night. It's also the toughest day from Salt Lake to Laramie. There is facilities there where I can get a car and get to a motel and find something for the night. And then after that, getting into Nebraska, things get a little bit more interesting. So I may have to talk to my friend Josh Bowden and have him make some suggestions for me as I get there. So if you haven't been to 50xchallenge.info, definitely go ahead there, and there's a lot of information about the trip. And I'm going to try and blog a little bit more, but another video that I'm going to do is a little bit about my fitness regime, and I'm also going to show a separate video with all of the equipment and some of the choices and options that I've had to try and figure out. So hopefully you guys will find that a pretty interesting video. And the last thing I want to point out is that you're going to be able to track me real time along the way. And so you can click on this this link here for Garmin, takes you to 50x Challenge, and you'll actually be able to follow me live and see some of those routes. I'm about to turn it all back on, so you might even catch my next big training flight where I'm going to fly to the top of Mount Shasta. The mount is all the way at 14,000 feet, so it's a really good test flight for me to do some more testing on the engine, make sure that I've got it leaned correctly for some of these high altitude flying, and that it's going to hopefully behave perfectly, and I'm going to have all the power that I need, and that also that the wing is going to do fairly well at these high altitudes. I've taken an 18-meter snake up to the top of Mount Shasta before, so I know this Da Vinci Disco can pull it off. The question is, how much uplift wind can we get from the mountain, making that much easier rather than that slow, steady climb that you might get if the winds are not helping you out. So you'll see here that in the Garmin I've already implemented the route for the northern route. You should be able to still see the route for the coast to coast, and as you see, it's a good portion away the country. So I'm hoping for success. It's going to be a particularly difficult trip, but it wouldn't be a challenge if I didn't try and do it. But there are no guarantees of success, and if you decide to go ahead and join me and meet me at some of the airports that I go to, absolutely look forward to meeting people along the way, and don't be afraid to reach out and say hi, whether it's through Facebook or YouTube. Definitely, if you have not subscribed to 50x Challenge on YouTube, make sure you go ahead and check that bell. This is where I'm releasing all these videos, so get those updates and get to see those videos the moment they come out. Might even be able to do some live video. Definitely probably going to do more time-lapse than anything else, and we'll post it after the fact. I am going to try and check in live at some of the airports that I go to and just talk about how things are going, and just be a little bit more interactive, and allow for that engagement. So make sure that you join in if you can. And that about covers it. I'm sure I've left some things out about my planning, but I think hopefully, as you've seen here, the basic step process that I use is really to initially find out that straight line, go ahead and look at Sky Vector and look at all the airports that are available to me, and then as I do that along the way, I can go back in and start to add in all those airports that I think I can make or that I want to use. And then, of course, alternate airports are a very critical part of that planning. Where can I go if I'm going to run low on fuel or there's some kind of a problem? Obviously, if I have more airports that are fairly close together, that I don't need quite so many of those airports, those alternates, but as you see from this, all of the color coding helps me know what's going on. Even some gas stations along the road if I get really stuck. And one of the things I'll just quickly finish off with here is the arrival at Oshkosh. If you're going to Oshkosh, it'd be great to catch up with you there. There are very strict rules while Oshkosh is going on about the airspace, and there are arrival procedures for both regular general aviation aircraft coming in, and there is also a dedicated arrival procedure and specific times of the day when we can arrive. And as you'll see here, the blue actually represents the two different methods in which general aviation might come in, and this orange area is exactly the flight path that you have to fly and follow into Oshkosh within the windows that they specify, which is usually about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. So I have to make that initial flight all the way out from where is it? Yeah, Friendship out in Adams. Maybe I'll just zoom out a second here. And I've got to be able to make all the way from there and then join the flight path that is dedicated for us to get in. I do have a couple of alternates here that I could go to, make the flight just a little bit shorter if necessary, and even a private airport if necessary. And there's even another one here real close that I could go to if something goes wrong. And I actually have another alternate location which is used by some Paramotor pilots to go ahead and take off. So that's kind of it for the Sonoma to Oshkosh. It's a very difficult trip. If you get a chance, really dig into that map, and you'll see every bit of the terrain that I look at. I look at everything from where the roads are, and of course to how high I might fly, and how easy it is to get back there. And I actually look at and try and memorize as best as I can a lot of the path. And even before every flight, when I load each of the waypoints into ForeFlight and into the other application that I use as a backup, that has all of these waypoints loaded in, and then I have to load the specific waypoints for that flight. And so the planning for each of those is very important, and of course making sure that I have adequate radio communication to not only talk to air traffic control but also other airports, and make sure that all works. So in my next video I'm going to cover some of the equipment. Actually, my next video I think is going to be my fitness, but on the equipment video I'm even going to be talking about my radio setup, my ADS-B, so I have flight following, and all these things that I've done to try and make sure that it's going to be absolutely safe. So thank you for watching. Make sure that you subscribe, and thank you. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you in the air soon.